everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today. Because today, that's right, you've got a book you wanted to share. You know, every once in a while we take part in our scheduled reading, but we like to go our own paths sometimes and read our own books and keep that creative spark going. And in this case, Dylan, you went off and read a unique little story that you've decided to come to the show and share with us today. Isn't that right?
That is exactly right, Charles.
I thought so.
Am ready to... I am ready to recommend This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is written by two authors, Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. It is a novella. It won numerous awards. It won the Nebula Award for Best Novella of 2019, the 2020 Hugo Award for Best Novella as well, and the BSFA Award for Best Shorter Fiction. I think you also mentioned it was a Goodreeds Choice Award winner, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a nominee for Best Science Fiction in 2019.
Just a nominee. Oof.
Yeah.
Wow, you win the Hugo, but you can't swing the Goodreads
Tough
award.
to crack that Goodreads Choice Award.
Right.
We'll have to settle for the Hugo.
I'm sure they'll take the Hugo and the Nebula and be okay with it. But it's a charming
Better
book.
luck next time, guys.
Right. I'm sure it's a big disappointment when you only take home the Hugo and the Nebula, but it's the other award I mentioned, but it's under 200 pages. So and as you can see, Charles, it's a little book, and you gotta love a book that's able to deliver in that short a time. We love Brandon Sanderson, but we're in the midst of reading Rhythm of War, and that is, like, what was 1,200 plus pages, something like
it's
that.
Like 60 hours of audiobook. So
right.
That's the metric I'm going, which is like nice. 3 pretty lengthy fantasy novels.
Yeah, it's nice to take a little bit of time away and read some science fiction, relatively light on the science part of it, but some science fiction that I cruised through. It's like read it before bed, 20 minutes every night for a little while, and then I was done with it before I knew it. Absolutely fantastic book. I gave it 5 stars over on Goodreads, and I'm looking forward to getting deeper into a review here, Charles, because I really love this one.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about it. It's kind of went under my radar. When you brought it up, I had never heard of it, so I'm interested in learning more.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit outside what we normally read. It's outside our typical community in terms of the fantasy reading community. It's funny how something like this can win Hugo and Nebula, but because it's science fiction and not fantasy, it just kind of goes under the radar for us. And I'm sure there's all sorts of huge science fiction fans who this was like a huge deal that they were talking about a lot in their community. But I'd seen it around. I love the title. And the cover's pretty nice too. So whenever you catch me with a cool title like This Is How You Lose the Time War, I gravitate toward it. I'm apparently really into time travel novels, even though I was going to say
this is not the first time travel novel you brought to the table, or even the second.
No, I know. I don't know what my deal is. Like, I remember when I brought it up last time, and I caught some heat for this on social media. I was like, every time I see something about time travel, I kind of roll my eyes because I'm like, oh, haven't we done this enough? And then I just go and read another time travel book. So it's an interesting quirk, I guess, where sometimes you don't know what like you yourself gravitate toward. And for me, yeah, this is I guess scratching that time travel itch. But yeah, I'll get into it. It's not like this deep science fiction base, or I should rephrase that. It's not heavy on the science fiction aspects. It's just kind of has the time travel and the fact that it's set deep in the future as a backdrop to what it's primarily about. But I describe it as spy versus spy meets Romeo and Juliet in a science fiction world based around a time travel driven war between two post-human societies. Like
wow, that? Spy versus spy.
It's a Dylan Marsh original. Yeah.
I haven't thought about spy versus spy in a hot minute. Okay, I'm interested. Go on.
Think about it. Think about it, Charles.
I'm going to process that as you continue.
I'm inviting you to think about it.
Invitation accepted.
Spy versus spy, right? It's like these two rivals kind of like going at it. Were they called Red and Blue, the two spies in Spy versus Spy?
I thought it was black and white. Wasn't it black and white?
Oh, is it black and white? Yeah.
Mate, I thought so.
We'll look it up. It's less important. The two characters in this are Red and Blue, but they kind of have that like spy versus spy rivalry relationship. And yeah, it's also an epistolary novel, which I just learned what that meant because I'm not as refined as some folks. Do you know that one, Charles?
No.
I don't want to put you on the spot. No.
Episcopal?
But I disclose
sounding?
epistolary. No. Epistolary. So I only put you on the spot because I disclosed I didn't know it. So it's a novel that's written as a series of letters, which is kind of interesting. We've got these two characters, right? Yeah, so we got these two characters where there's Red, who works for a post-singularity technotopia called The Agency. And then on the other side of this time travel-based war, we've got Blue, who works for an entirely organic, like nature-driven, future organization that's called The Garden. And the two are on opposite sides of this war in which each respective organization has all of these different agents that they send out to like the countless parallel universes going on and have them try to alter the timeline in order to serve whatever future that agency wants to exist, like whatever future favors their own vision of how they want things to be. Mm-hmm. So we've got Red on one side as the serving the tech-based one, and then the nature-based one is Blue. Both are kind of the best at what they do, and they're growing bored because they're just living through like countless, it doesn't say how long, but I'm like imagining they're living like thousands and thousands, maybe millions of years over the course of their lives, and they're just like really good at it, but they're kind of growing bored and like jaded by the whole thing, and they're sort of going through the motions until like when she's walking among a battlefield of this dying world where Red just like killed a bunch of people to try to serve the future. She stumbles upon a letter from Blue, and it reads, "Burn before reading." So it's like this encrypted message that only exists when she burns it. And it's just this letter of Blue just like mocking and taunting Red because Blue just like did something to screw up like what Red was trying to change about the timeline. So like it's really good, the wordplay and all this kind of stuff of how they write this. But reading this letter, it's just like mocking her, taunting her, and then Red in the next chapter goes ahead and does the same thing back to Blue. So it's each chapter is kind of written as like there's this brief portion where you're like dealing with like each one is from like it's an alternating point of view. So first one red, second one blue, next one red, next one blue, in terms of the chapters. Each chapter starts off with kind of like, red was in this world, dealing with these kind of things, and then stumbles upon a letter. Blue was Blue was hanging out with Genghis Khan and doing this kind of stuff. Blue stumbles upon the letter. And then it's like these back and forth epistolary things, and it starts out as this very much like, hey, I screwed you over, like, take that, like, see you next time. Sort of, if we're going, Charles was very focused on Pokemon for some reason before we were getting into this, because I brought up red and blue
in the world.
Yeah, that he kept saying that over and over again. It's like, can we talk about something else? I want to record. But it's the red and the blue talk. Once you say red and blue, Charles is just like, oh, I remember I had a Game Boy. And he was going on and on about the Game Boys. And saying how great it was because he had a twin brother, so he could get the red, and then Chris could get the blue. Mm-hmm. But anyway, all of this to say, it was kind of like the like Red will come to find this letter, and just like the much longer equivalent and wordier equivalent of like, Gary was here, Ash is a loser, or whatever. That's like
classic.
The thing, right?
Okay, I understand
right?
now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. So it's, as long as I put it in Pokemon terms, then Charles can grasp it.
You're doing great.
It's really interesting, though, because all of Red's letters are written by Gladstone, and all of Blue's letters are written by El-Mohtar. So we've got, like, that's how they do the two author thing. And they actually wrote this, like, they came up with a general outline, and they're on a writing retreat together, and they would just, like, sit across from each other, and one would write, like, the letter, and then they'd give it to the other person, and then the other person would read the letter, and they would write back. So the only thing they came up together with were more of the, like, plot points, and then they would come up together with, like, oh, where is Blue this time? What, like, what historical situation? Like, there'll be times where she's, like, in Atlantis or something like that. So they'd come up with that together, but they're genuinely surprised by what the other person is writing as a response to their letter. So it's a very organic feeling in that way. So
what an interesting
it's a really cool
writing
premise.
process. Yeah. Because I was wondering how two writers work together to create a book, and then, well, you make it a book about two writers exchanging letters. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Like, yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I like that. Clever.
Yeah.
A writer's retreat, you said. What the heck a retreat is this?
Yeah, so, I mean, writers do this. They'll, like, get writing groups together. I think there's ones where you can, like, pay to be a part of it. But they'll get groups of writers together. They'll just, like, go somewhere that is remote, and oftentimes with no Wi-Fi, no internet, which seems, people always talk about that being helpful for the process of writing. I don't know, when I'm, like, trying to write stuff, like, I write a lot for school, and I'm, like, always using, like, the online dictionary and thesaurus and things like that to try to help. So I don't know, I guess some people find it's like it reduces distraction, but
maybe they'll have some dictionaries at the retreat or something.
No dictionaries and no thesauruses. Those only exist online, Charles.
Oh,
There's
okay.
No such thing. Yeah, so it's so it's they'll just, like, go somewhere remote, and, like, all they'll do is sit there and write for the most part. So I'm sure it's super helpful. They wrote, like, I think they said 30,000 words of this, and, it's not a huge novel, so it's most of it. And then they're like, oh, we'll finish it up over email or whatever. And they ended up actually not doing that. And then they would just, when they were at conventions together, just, like, sit next to each other, presumably, like, in a hotel room, and just, like, do it again. And it's, so really interesting premise for a novel, and really interesting the writing process. And that writing retreat, I think they said, was like 10 days. So, like, they kind of cranked this out. And meanwhile, it's like the prose is so good. Some people find it almost like dense, and they've some trouble following it at times. But yeah, they were able to write this like award-winning novel that's like widely considered to have great prose in a pretty short period through this unique writing process.
That's super cool. So you said that the language was like, is it like really literary language? Like, what are we talking about here? Is this like a capital L literature kind of story, as we always say?
Yeah, it's one of those books that definitely, for genre writing, sits closer to that capital L side. We'll talk about books like, let's say, The Fifth Season, right, by N.K. Jemisin.
Sure.
As a book that's like clearly that's a fantasy book, but it's also just in how the prose of it and its approach to themes, that kind of stuff, it gets closer to that capital L. I would say this, in terms of the writing style, feel closer to capital L literature at times than your typical fantasy novel or sci-fi novel. But I'll say also, it's like, I wouldn't describe it as overly I'm thinking of this word not overly highfalutin, if you will.
Ooh.
And I think it's
which is itself overly highfalutin.
Right. Yeah, I've always found that a funny word, right? It's one of those like words that is like I don't know, describes itself. So I would not describe it as highfalutin. If anything, it's kind of funny because you see their relationship develop over time as they keep writing each other these letters, and it's no secret that there's like romance elements to this. If you look anywhere, like spoiler-free online reviews, people mention that, and I said the Romeo and Juliet aspect of it. So you see them get closer over time, and you see their writing style in the letters change to one that feels more familiar. And it's also kind of, they're both trying to show off at the beginning and kind of like crap on the other person, and they end up moving away from that more as time goes on. But it's also like the word play is very it's just very clever, where if you almost would be well served by giving it another read afterward, just to like actually figure out all of the wordplay that's going on in it. There's one point where I guess never mind, I shouldn't give that away, but I'll just say there's a lot of times where I kind of like read something, I'd be like, oh god, I'm not entirely sure what that's referencing, and you'd have to almost like do some Googling, because it's like, yeah, it's very cleverly written. And also people did find, like, sometimes just looking at other people's reviews of it, like the vocabulary they found to be too I guess fancy. And I think that, yeah, I'm moving away from highfalutin. I'm moving toward, like, they use a lot of big words, which I don't know, that didn't bother me too much, but I could see how it could take away from the reading experience for some. It kind of has the feel of almost like when we were reading Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. Not quite as like plotless and wandering as that book is, which I say lovingly. I adore everything that Rothfuss has written. For sure. At the same time, it's, except the tweet that he wrote where he called me Brent, that I did not enjoy as much, that among Rothfuss's writing.
That's pretty amazing.
But right, even if you get called Brent, you still feel like
an acknowledgement is an acknowledgement. You just got to take it sometimes. It's like, yes, I am Brent. Yes, like, sir.
It's like, it's one of those things. Like, should I just change the name at this point? And then
Yeah.
he called me by the right name. No one knows any different. So, yeah, anyway, it's got that kind of, like, at times, lyrical feel to it. Not, like, I'll say Amal El-Mohtar is an award-winning poet as well, and that shows up in her writing. And it's it's kind of like let it wash over you experience. Like, that's how I see it as best enjoyed. Like, you remember that feeling from when we were reading the Slow Regard of Silent Things, Rothfuss's book, right?
Yeah. No, it was very atmospheric, and it was more about being in the moment, and I think the language served that as well by being more abstract and poetic, and more so than about plotting or world building or what other classical sci-fi fantasy stuff like magic systems, stuff like that. You know, it was just more about being like experiential.
Yeah. It's experiential in some ways, but it's also very focused on the relationship. Like, the whole book is primarily about Red and Blue's relationship, how it develops, and it's very unique. I mean, I imagine that comes across from my attempt to, like, pitch it, the spy versus spy meets Romeo and Juliet bit of it all. I would say the sci-fi elements I mentioned just before, they're more in the background. So if you are someone who's like wants to get into the nitty gritty of like how the time travel works, what are the organizations that they're working for trying to accomplish, what would Red impacting this timeline do, and why has Blue been sent to stop it? It's like none of that really takes center stage ever in this book, which I didn't mind at all. Like, I'm more of a character and relationship focused reader anyway. I'm sure you'd probably describe yourself in that way as well, Charles. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. But where I've seen people not enjoy the book as much, it came from that. Like they didn't explain the time travel at all. And I apologize for that, the way I said that, with the impression of a person who's somehow nerdier than I am, because their voice got even nerdier than my voice is at its baseline. That's the person I'm doing an impression of, and I'm sorry if that's you. But it's it is probably I don't really have that many regrets, but that is where I would say, like, this might not be the book for you, but if you enjoy the strong prose, if you're a character-driven reader, if you're a relationship-driven reader, and if the premise that I've described appeals to you at all, plus the fact that, like, hey, it's not just me recommending it. There's another one that has received a lot of really impressive awards and all that kind of stuff, then absolutely great fit for readers who are into all that.
That sounds really cool. And that kind of, while you're talking about recommendations, I'm wondering what other books you'd recommend. Like, if people liked a certain book that they might like this, like what kind of close recommendations do you have?
Yeah, it's a tough one because it's so unique, but I would say that, like I said, Rothfuss's like prose and his writing, that one is a great fit, especially if you liked Slow Regard of Silent Things. If you only really like the Kingkiller Chronicle and then you read Slow Regard of Silent Things and you're like, ooh, like, this is bad, which people have that opinion all the time. We saw a lot of that when we were, I think there's also the frustration that people had that's like, oh, Rothfuss, you just published another Kingkiller book and it's this. Like,
it's not Doors of Stone. Yeah, exactly.
So I think, though, you need to appreciate the prose and the experience of those kind of things to appreciate this book. I would also say another time travel focused book that I read that was more about the relationships and how the time travel can affect people, and was a little bit more on like the capital literature than your typical like genre book. The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. That's another one of the time travel books that I've brought up before.
One of many travel books.
One of many. Oh, yeah, completely one of many. So there's like, I brought up Lost in Time, which was another, like, I haven't done a full episode on it.
I don't think so, but it's come up in recommendations. Isn't there one by the Station 11 author that was also time travel?
Oh, you're right. Oh, wow. You know what? But that Sea of Tranquility is what you're talking about. Yeah. That is a great recommendation, actually, for this as well. Oh. Which is another. That one won the Goodreads Choice Award or whatever for science fiction last year. So,
but did it win the Hugo?
I would say that did not win the Hugo. I don't think
Room for improvement, guys. Across the board.
Yeah, she'll have to like wipe her tears with all that HBO Station 11 TV show money. She'll have to just blot out the tears with the stacks of $100 bills that she got from that one. But
what about like Piranesi, which is another novella? Unusually written, very literary, poetic language, not so focused on plot.
Well, you know what? That might be an epistolary novel, too. I don't know if it counts if it's journal entries instead of letters. See, I don't know. We might have to do some Googling. But you know what? That's a fantastic recommendation, Charles.
Look at me.
And if you're into that, yeah, look at you. You haven't read the book, and you probably just gave two better recommendations.
2 strong recs.
Right. Yeah, those are fantastic
So I think it's a collection of
props
letters.
To you, Charles.
So I don't know if Piranesi counts because it was a journal.
So journal. Is there a separate fancy name for?
I'm sure there
highfalutin name for that one?
I am sure there is, but I don't know it. It's too highfalutin for me. I know about Bildungsroman, which is like coming of age. Remember that? Bildungsroman?
Is that
when we were doing...
is it Bildungsroman or like Bunding? I think...
I remember it was when we were reading... oh, God, what's the name of the book?
Kingkiller.
Ursula.
It was
Kingkiller. No, it was... We were reading Ursula K. Le Guin.
You're right.
Her main famous book was super famous, beloved by... Wizard of Earthsea. It was that.
Was it? Oh, you couldn't think of the name.
Yeah, but it was a Bildungsroman, and that is a novel dealing with one person's formative years or spiritual education. Which is for sure under the category.
This is not a Bildungsroman.
No, but that's the only other.
This book has like beings that have presumably lived like many thousands of years. But you know what? They come this is kind of a spiritual... I know you weren't saying this is a Bildungsroman. You were just using the word that you learned and you were very excited about. But
I was trying to keep up.
This does have...
With all these fancy... Like these two have went to like really fancy schools here and Yale and all this. So just
I saw
to keep
Max
up.
Gladstone went to Yale. Amal El-Mohtar went somewhere. That was like a real competitive school too.
Mm-hmm. And she was reviewing books in the New York Times and creative writing instructor at Carleton University and the University of Ottawa. Served as a host on Brandon Sanderson's creative writing podcast. So, all kinds of...
Writing excuses.
I'm just trying to...
As if they need us. Yeah. It's hard to keep up with people like that, and
just like writing Hugo award-winning books in 10 days.
Yeah, exactly. Charles, you want to go to some remote location with me and write which also sounds like a weird thing to ever start a conversation. Hey, do you want to go to some remote location with me? If anyone ever starts to say that, the answer is no. But moving forward, would you like to go on a writing retreat with me? That sounds better. And just spend 10 days and we'll write a Hugo Award-winning book. You and me, Charles.
We can give it the old college try. It might
can
come
do
out
that.
more like Spy versus Spy and end up in Mad Magazine instead. But you know what?
Yeah.
Give it a try. It's just to see what we
Yeah.
come up with. But I think these guys stand on their own with their fantastic prose. And I'm glad I nailed the book Rex, you know? That's a pretty good...
You really did.
I mean, what can I say?
You got a
It's
gift.
my marketing brain, dude. I can make these comparisons.
Because every time we do a recommendations episode, you always ask me that question. I never prepare for it. So that I'm always in the moment. I should know. Like, I'm not blaming you. Like, I should know that question's coming. And I just never prepare for it. So I'm always on the spot, like scrambling. I feel like I usually, I stand by my recommendations.
Sure.
But yeah, I think yours were even stronger. I'd also say that, like, I don't know, the Piranesi wreck that was smart. I think like Sea of Tranquility, it lent itself pretty easy, right? It's another sort of like Goodreads choice feeling novel that's a like relatively recent novel that was written about time travel. Isn't like super hard science fiction, even though it's technically science fiction. So it's like, that's easy. You nailed it. But it was, it was right up the middle, It was a softball for you. But Piranesi, that's clever, especially because the writing style of having journal entries is kind of like the letters, and I like that. So if you're a big Piranesi fan, like we both are,
for sure,
definitely recommend checking this one out.
Well, the writing, the approach to writing this book alone has me curious. Just like two creative minds having fun, experimenting with the writing process, literally exchanging letters. And then it sounds like the language itself achieves that, being kind of clever. And, I guess, is it like kind of humorous at times, the way they try and one-up each other and retort and all that? Okay.
Yeah, I should have probably said it more explicitly, but I was trying to, I guess, get at with the whole, like, Ash is a loser type, like, we're making fun of each other type thing. But it's very funny, and the way the wordplay is used is, it's like playful. The relationship between the two characters as they're sort of taunting each other, it's very funny and playful, and it doesn't take itself overly seriously. It's also, I would say, for romance readers, there's a lot to dig your teeth into in this one too. It would be what people refer to as a sapphic novel, which like that term
so
has
much
become you're learning a lot, Charles. It's a novel that has like a romantic or sexual relationship between two women as like a central point of it. So
never heard of it.
Yeah, the phrase sapphic. Yeah, I see it tossed around on social media. But both characters use she, her pronouns. Neither is like, it's post-human. Like both of their societies are post-human in some way. One being like technological singularity, the other being like entirely organic and like nature driven. So they're not like women in the sense of what we typically think about, but they are both identifying like she, her. So that definitely, it comes up as one of the like top results when you search sapphic novels. Well, Charles, I'm just glad that you've learned a lot of new things today. I'm glad that we branched out from the topic of Pokemon. I think that, it's one of the nice things about...
Although, is Pokemon fantasy, though? That's something we should revisit. Note to self, future episode idea, Pokemon. Okay. As you would.
Okay, I'm glad you put that note right here. You already covered Is Star Wars Fantasy with Derek from Roger, a Star Wars podcast, your vanity project that you do with our close friend Derek. And you had him on.
Yeah.
This was like, geez, this was a while ago. Summer before last.
It's like a year ago.
You two really chopped it up about Is Star Wars Fantasy. Did you answer?
You'll have to listen and find out. Listen and find out. Great plug for the episode, you know?
Yep. Everyone go back.
I'll never tell.
Star Wars podcast. Yeah, I'll never tell. Community reference. So when is Roger, a Star Wars podcast, returning, Charles? That's what the world wants to know.
Not soon enough, friends. But aren't we talking about how we're going to lose a time war? Isn't that why we're here today?
Yes, that is why we're here today. Yeah, I mean, I pretty much said most of what I want to say. I'll just return to, like, this book. It's under 200 pages. I found it pretty easy to read in the sense of, like, there's not a million things to track, a million different things going on. Some people will find it a little bit dense. That wasn't my experience with it. I think it's a great palate cleanser. We talk about those sometimes with these books that are unique and are relatively short. I know Charles and I, between we call them Chihuahua killers, like Brandon Sanderson's Rhythm of War. When this book, you can safely keep around a small pet with no worry that it's going to hurt them unless they eat it. Like, I could actually imagine some pets eating the paperback version of this, which is, you're less afraid that Rhythm of War is going to get eaten because it's well over 1,000-page doorstopper. But that being said, if this falls off the shelf and hits your Chihuahua, not great for the Chihuahua, but they're going to be okay. They're going to make it. And I think that sometimes when you're big epic fantasy readers like us, going for something that's more sci-fi but not super technical and has enjoyable prose, is funny. Oh, you know what, Charles? One more rec. Murderbot.
Oh, that's a good one.
Another novella. Yeah, another novella that won the Hugo, I believe, right? Did Murderbot win the Hugo?
I feel
like it did.
I feel like it did too. Yeah, I'll Google it while you go with that. Why All Systems Red is a good rec.
Yeah, well, All Systems Red, the first Murderbot novella by Martha Wells, is just a fantastic, technically sci-fi novel, but isn't overly focused on the technological aspects, explaining how the world works and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny with quirky main character who is not entirely human. I would say that all of those things pretty much apply to This Is How You Lose the Time War. So,
and it did win the Nebula and the Hugo in 2018, which
it has
the year before this book.
Yes. Yeah, so this won the 2019 Nebula and the 2020 Hugo. So I guess they were sort of feeling that vibe when it comes to the best novella category.
Should call it How to Win the Nebula and the Hugo, That would be a more apt book title, no?
No. No. Definitely not.
Fair.
So, I'm sorry, Charles. I almost just let you hang with dead air. Like, I almost just was like, what if I just don't respond to that and I just let it sit? So I decided to at least
support each other on the show, graceful.
Right, we're supposed to yes and.
Yes.
I didn't yes and you there. I just knowed you. So bad co-hosting by me. I'm gonna have to, go to the co-hosting penalty box after this and really think over the choices that I've made, not just today, but in my life overall. If only there were some way to travel back in time and change it If only I were a character in This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. Then I would be able to go back and change that horrible, horrible way that I responded to Charles. And who knows what kind of great future that could create. But we'll never see it. And that is a shame, Charles.
It is a shame, but you know what? We will endure because there's so many other episodes of Friends Talking Fantasy to be had and to be heard. But for now, guys, this book sounds very interesting. I'm really interested in the way it was written and the way the story is structured. I've always liked books like that. I loved All Systems Red, Piranesi. I liked the one where the guy's on Mars. Shoot, what's the name of that one? You read one of his books.
The
Martian.
Yeah.
The Martian.
The Martian.
Yeah, I love The Martian, which is not exactly the same. It's another journal thing, but love it all the same. And it's got me curious, so have to check it out someday soon. But for now, I think there's nothing left, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, of course.
I'd just love to add that we should get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
You got it. Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today and you want to support the show, follow us over on social media. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end on Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they want to support the show even further than following us on social media and they liked what they heard today, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can now do over on Spotify. It's just 2 clicks over at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, and it means so much to us when you do that. It really does. And you can also rate and or review on Apple Podcasts, and we always really appreciate when anyone does that. Puts a smile on our face when we read a nice review of the show. It really does. It actually usually means I read it and I screenshot it and then I text it to Charles and I'm like, hey Charles, look what someone said, and he's like, that's very nice. And I assume he smiles when he's looking at it.
I sure
but
do.
You don't have to do that. Just listening is more than enough. You don't have to make Charles smile. But it's nice.
Just listening, guys, already brings a smile to my face, and I love you all for that. So thank you all for making it to the end. Thank you for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.